You'll salute to the philosophers, beginners or confirmed, who have clicked on the channel I am launching this day, Plato, along the thread by thread of the texts. Any shunting error apart, if you have been ringing my doorbell, it is probably because you feel starving or tempted in front of this rich cognitive potential transmitted along the thread of the most refined philosophic tapestry, the one that gives to understand some contents enhanced, that gives to speculate upon some suggestion baited by various characters weaved in Plato's dialogues, as well as by the author in person in the letters attributed to him. On this founding moment, I had to outline a clear delimitation of my itinerary, of my objective, of my attack angle, and of my method, so that the born philosophers, disposed by nature to philosophy, to whom I am addressing, should feel invited to find refuge and habitation beside my hearth, to go thoroughly into the wealth of the Platonician text. Meanwhile, the others will pass their way to search elsewhere the object of their desires. To the tourist I wish fair winds, and to the pilgrims welcome. Everyone has their own taste. I would like to make clear from now on that my own taste is driving me to a stream of thought, which, since the dawn of time, has been running across Asia, Mesopotamia, Egypt, then, after having sufficiently flowed along the dark veins of Orphism, sprang into half shade with Pythagoras, which at last, having increased its visibility with Plato, will fork in a pair of brilliant parallel vectors, one passing through Clement of Alexandria, Plotinus, Proclus, Damascus, Denis, Boëtius, and affiliated; the other passing through Aristotle, Theophrastus, Simplicius, St. Thomas, and affiliated. This fluid of thought that the mystics call initiation, Andronikos of Rhodes called metaphysics. Its flow is springing from one simple axiom: the immanent nature, object of experience, is diverting from a transcendent but related supernature, object of intuition. This stream has been increasing, has been more or less considered navigable and everlasting till the wars of religion in Europe. Then it has been subdued by the rationalists, disintegrated by the enlighters, and pulverized by their successors, positivists, Marxists, Nietzscheists, Freudist, pragmatists, utilitarists, phenomenologists, deconstructionists, all have agreed that it had to be reduced to a network of underground canalizations, so that the river sprung from the Holy Heart has to be searched nowadays as a sewer, not exhausted although, waiting the fashions to be old-fashioned, waiting the things to rub out the words. All right. For each wisdom lover, things last while the word keep passing. Let them pass therefore, the way they can, except by the channel, underground but not polluted, in which I will tackle any kind of philosophic question only from the metaphysic incident angle, the resilient, irredentist angle whose obliquity is tending as far as possible to the upright, from catacombs to heaven. That is why I can already allow myself to transmit to all those who have not yet zapped the salute that Plato reserves to the addressees of his letters, Eupratein. Let us begin by explaining this point. The prefix eu marks the happy outlet of a well-driven process. Pratein is diverting from the word prasso, given praxis, which means engage, a development, a gesture, a work of pure thought or writing, a crossing, a mission, a line of behavior, a destiny. Eupratein means I wish that all you begin will be leaded to a good end, not only as for its internal finality, but above all, ordering itself to the external finality by excellence, doing well the good. Socrates, if we believe the most talentuous of his memorialists, has been using this expression in front of the young Alcibiades. Ostis kalos pratei, uki kai eu pratei. Beautifully behaving, is it not well behaving? And Maurice Croiset adds in note 1 of the Belles Lettres edition, the Greek locution that is literally translated by well behaving signified in the use be happy. In consequence of what? It seems that this used forced the Greek locutor to admit the pious wish that a beautiful and good behavior had to lead to happiness, whatever the occasion losses, and most of all, then that an immoral behavior leaded to misfortune, whatever the occasional profits. Rich ethic platform here condensed in three syllables rich of sense. No need to linger upon the tactic ingenuousness or the strategic ingenuousness of this formula, that from their blind mechanism the materialist has been joking, producing the idle argument of prosperities of vice and misfortunes of virtue. Strong argument for those who have tapped the horizon of life with the nothingness cork. Weak argument for those who makes life issuing towards a bet upon eternity. As St. Augustine wrote, living good must be useful to this, live forever. As a result of which I announce from now on that if your receipt of happiness is no limits, enjoyment, every man for himself, and all shots are allowed, the contents of this channel will not make you happy. Perhaps would you rather quickly invest your quota and time of available brain on matching channels? You have got a large choice. For the remaining dissidents, I will begin by introducing myself. My name is Daniel Robert Barbaroux. I was born in 1953. I assume with serenity my Celtic roots, my French nationality, my Catholic religion, my male sex, my heterosexual manners, and my status of Platonician philosopher. After having followed primary and secondary studies in a Catholic school, I began studies of philosophy that I proceeded till a PhD thesis, L'Arché chez Platon, under the direction of Jean-François Mattei, professor at the University of Nice. From 1978 to 2014, I haven't been practicing the profession of philosophy teacher in different high schools of Nice and Paris areas. Then, at the end of my career, in a private Catholic Universitary Institute of Paris, after which I claimed my retirement rights to continue my researches, of which I want now to propose the fruit on internet. What had brought me about making such a career choice, and most of all, such a life choice? I first discovered a kind of signal that caught precociously my attention as early as my class of second, Mr. Allary, teacher of physics, chief of choir, and man of taste, was talking occasionally about Pythagoras, who had introduced, in the history of the ideas, a mathematic and musical conception of the cosmos, and about Plato, who had fallen into his step. So, while exploring the antiquity shelf on the school library, the fate made me fall, not on, but in Phaidon. The superficial boy that I was has fallen, aspired, inspired, in a gap of tri-dimensional thought, a catalytic fall in which my consciousness has been constrained to experiment some verticality upon the relief of those anticlinals and geosynclinals. A liberating way was opening, a tangent path out of the flatness imposed by the mentality of the micro Vanity Fair that was surrounding me. From the detergent that washes still more white to the politician that was about to restore the golden age, passing by the summer heat, all that sprinkle of toxic ideologians, curdled by demagogues, propagated by mediatic circuits, and taken over by the public, did not fit my temper. I did not know what I would find, but I knew what rolling mill of silliness I was leaving behind, and it was sufficient. So few things I understood from the Phaidon before vibrating on higher frequencies began to dissuade myself to grope at the surface of the things. They pushed me to undertake an orthogonal work of deepening and elevation, shrinking and expanding my germing spirit from its compact principles toward its bloom along the cosmic lines. Subsequently, the symposium taught me that this work, far from being dull, could become exulting. if motivated by a driving force. Eros, bearer of the hope to be rewarded by some trace of beauty. Then the Politeia, especially in the cave initiation, revealed to me the final cause of this work, soon transmuted to a mission, clarifying my vision until being able to clear the appearances of their deceiving overload in order to distinguish the lines of pure and simple reality. The being of beings, the no illusory by excellence, the feast towards which a desiring consciousness raises her arms, O Vegetai, from which the clarified consciousness is opening herself to the comprehension. That shrewd point of knowledge was only sketching at the surface of the things as a runaway point, but simultaneously it could be considered in each being as a radiant focus of energy. Sensitive to this radiance, the candidate to initiation should finally come to find in the shrewd point of his soul sufficient determination to master his desires and sufficient sense of direction to trace his way through appearances in order to look reality in the face. This struck at first sight as indiscernible as the Nazca trial could begin to be deciphered on the ground using the archaeologic method. Every time I spotted the faintest game of deceiving appearances, I had to plant a landmark. And, spot after spot, if my intuition could take some altitude, I should have some change to the mark on their grid, some geoglyphs, debossed prints, images referring to patterns. So was appearing to me, beginning my trip, thanks to Plato, the criterion of philosophic activity. Blow the shadows of the cave, as some are lifting the veil of Maya or Isis, and contemplate what is revealed under appearance. To join the philosophic way, I had to scrut any data, caring to use the shadow what the thing is not, to detect and catch the prey, what the thing is in itself. I evocated as first example of illusory shadows the sound bites that propaganda was moving about in popular songs, tabloids, TV series, advertisements, to force feed the public opinion. I will summon some others subsequently that I will try to unmask. During more than half a century, from my first interpretation of the cave to now, I have been driving my philosophic explorations, referring to this peculiar dial on my dashboard that I called ontologic densimeter, whose needle, from the capacity of the substances to the volatility of the simulation setups, indicated the proper ontologic consistency of each object I experimented. People, things, or statements. I just had to align my aim on the point of maximum intensity to determine my course. Although the effect was perfectly described by the shadows of the cave. The word illusion was not to be found within Plato's documents, which was not facilitating my characterization of the phenomenon. It seemed that the genius of Greek idiom was unawares. Homer had articulated the word ona, dream, too much particular. Socrates proposed apathy, treason, too much general. The Latin, more practical, offered the verb illudere that illustrates quite clearly the teasing of the appearances, simulating the real thing in its reality. By this way in, I began my investigation. I learned that the arrow of consciousness could miss the target of reality under two circumstances: being mistaken itself, error, or being betrayed by any object looking other than it was, illusion. But when, in the first case, the reasoning could proceed to a definitive correction, in the second case, the perception, stubbornly abused, would persist to contradict it. Everything was happening as if the anesthetic sting of illusion was shutting up the naive consciousness into a perverse game of insubstantial lures, sparkling promises uttered not to be kept. Initiation of the cave was teaching us, moreover, then that an inattentive, lazy, timorous, addictive consciousness would like better any reassuring illusion than a brutal reality. Even the philosophic consciousnesses were able to escape from that inertia only with difficulty. The dissident prisoner that the reader find book 7th of Politeia does not easily turn over to the liberating light. He is described as constrained, anankazoito, he suffers, algoi. He is once more forced, anankazoi, to watch the light and violently pushed, via, to climb the slope, whereas his pain, odunastai, makes him exasperated, aganaktein. Then, once arrived in full light, far from feeling any joy from his contemplations, he endured a blinding dazzle before being set free from his ancient fake opinions, doxazein, aim of the exercise. At least, back down to his tabernaculous comrades in the intention to liberate them, those inconsistent ignorants are accusing him of inconsistency before lynching him. Those decisive pages are not describing any funny carefree party, but a complicated, painful, dangerous parturition concluding itself by an accusatory inversion and an unjust execution. Except poison, it was, in the broad outlines, my route of solitary track and hunt, fighting against internal idleness and external disloyalty of the objects and persons I met during the period that was separating me to the literary baccalaureate class, where an 8-hour weekly philosophy program was planned. The teaching of Miss Bonetti reinforced my theoric baggage in order to increase its efficiency. By coincidence, this clear-looking educator had chosen as oral takes of graduation the Gorgias. This dialogue introduced Polus, Gorgias, and Callicles, artful accomplices of this Thrasymach, who I had already noticed at the Cephalus reception in the first book of Politeia. At the turning point of this hot evening, 6 books later, Socrates had ornamented the singing apparatus of the cave with varied symbols in which my interpretation labored to distinguish natural illusion, treason of the sensations, from organized illusion, treason of the man. This indistinction was sought at the Callicles reception. Reasoning replaced symbols and studied only organized illusion, so that the reader could learn that crooks had been swift to understand the benefit they could draw from illusion. After having set some illusionist techniques, conjuring whose I suffered the bad effects in connection with my contemporary propagandists and propagandivorous. Moreover, when Frazemek has been spinning yarns without any qualification, Paulus, and particularly Gorgias, revealed nouns, rhetorics, sophistics, to qualify and define their verbal strategies, and Callicles justified the use of such means by a clear-cut vision of the word war of all against all, the good old jungle law. In such conditions, the fox, desiring to catch the cheese, had to intoxicate the crowds by turning the language away from its aesthetic function. Instead of saying the thing with the word, it was a matter of clearing out the thing of its substance and of replacing it by words artificially loaded with a simulacre of substance, emptying the fool for pretending to fill the vacuum and pretending to put this vacuum in vibration, not only selling wind, as Machiavel said, but an airless wind. Blow the zero in aeolian harps. Ever since, each time I met a sophist, I summoned him to put back some content in his works, or to be silent. Why did not the popular common sense do the same? Of course, the mental idleness can explain that many people prefer to let some so saying experts think at their place. But how to explain that a no vibrating vibration could smuggle some consciousnesses in resonance? Initiation already made me advise of the crushing proportion of the caverniculus, but did not give me the reason why. What were the deep causes of this Gregorism? From what kind of psychic malformation of deviation could be developed this sadomasochistic synergy between crow and fox? This phenomenon seemed to me as inexplicable as the massive rush of the lemmings to ocean and drowning. For the moment, I had not found any solution to this aporia, having not yet detected the perfusion of the cognitive sciences in the propaganda think tanks. But I could not I could count on a scout. By chance, the way of dissident was not definitely lonesome. A never-tired rager, a faithful companion of march, Socrates was preceding me, leaving some signals and clues. In this slipstream, the philosopher could progress on a vertical passage whose target was the being, while rhetors and sophists, kind of perverse wills, in perpetual diffusion or illusion, made their captive customers turn in circles on their flat networks of semiotic lines. Moreover, Socrates, far from considering those two processions as parallel, did not lose any opportunity to cross and to oppose them, so that from this point of the history of ideas, a war began, opposing a philosophia perennis to a sophistica perennis, war in which I took side at the faith in which the sophists seemed to close to victory. An occasioning of seasoning has been given to me while passing in superior studies. I followed there the lesson of Mr. Villani, eloquent pedagogue, whose visual sharpness incited the students to sharpen their own glance. Concerned not to influence his audience, Villani used to reserve his judgment while driving the ray, revealing the textual reliefs. He used the same process, scanner, meticulous, impartial. In front of Plato he prized very few, and in front of Nietzsche he tasted some more. Thanks to him, while I was noticeably improving my Platonician knowledge, I have been invited to rummage the Nietzschean flea market. The German intendant's quartermaster, warrior, had stimulating my curiosity, tickling with his pen the last man, hoping, hoping, and blinking, which I assimilated more or less to the caverniculus, while pushing against my dear backwards some jolly stabs that prevent me to doze off on them. His philosophic hygienism was satisfying me in the sick time we were crossing, until I understood it as the automedication of a hypochondriac cripple. In order to cure the obsolete backwards, the nonsense of the mask covering masks seemed to me a nightmare. Who will deny that it is better to try to know things and people as they are than to resign admitting them as they are showing themselves? Juggling with illusion could sometimes divert under condition of a short joke, but multiplying them to infinity, it was pushing anti-Platonism too far. Illusion upon illusion, waste of consciousness in vacuum's vibration, out of question. For me, nothingness is not vibrating, never has, never will. I could also throw out fillers with tweezers to the postmodern shoal of fish that in the slipstream of this fat sperm whale was trying to overbid upon fetishism of illusion. Nigrum nigro nigrius, the gang, Derrida, Deleuze, Foucault, agitated agitators of the buzzing zero, even passing for the typical overdue, I was not convinced. I judged that a philosophic device deliberately founded upon illusion would be nothing but an unhealthy offspring, a sick joke, pedant narcissism, and impudent snobism, till the pure cynicism that persisted on nonsense. Bad books, however refined, futile extravagances that produced in my mind the same effect as the contemporary art. For the time being, in a stubborn denial of beauty, obtaining from the public as much consideration as Phidias or Bach, exhibiting scrap iron coming straight from the rubbish dump, gifting to ears an orchestra who plays no sound. What was it about? But counting common sense, common decency. So appeared to me those Dadaist gags, poisonous fruits of a civilization in decomposition, in which were self-claiming philosophers, some showy garrulous who replaced the real being by counterfeit reflections, in which were self-claiming artists, some ashtray crushers whose tasteless provocation were trying to expel the disincrustation of any overloading on the visible, tactile, sonorous raw material, the emergence of the purified form, suitable for arousing aesthetic emotion, presentiment of beatitude, and nobody to exclaim, the king is naked. Whatever I like it or not, I had to admit that coming from who knows what Manvantara, between the century of Descartes and the century of deconstruction, the Philosophia Perennis had lost day after day immense territories to the benefit of the Sophistica Perennis. The Socratic strategy being worthless to resist to the unceasing metamorphosis of those imitators of Proteus, eager of ruptures, transgressions, subversions, and justifying their rambling by the mythomania of progress. The whole thing exposing the title of modernity, then postmodernity. This invasion drove me to ask myself about the nature of this famous modernity that put down the needle on my personal ontologic densimeter and made me lose my course. I learned that at the origin of the word, etymology finds the Latin modo, meaning instantly. The shifting etymology of instant indicates that this phenomenon is definitely impossible to stabilize. The instant is a quantic electron substantially and existentially inconsistent, an obliteration wiping out the past, meanwhile being wiped out by the future. So that the so saying modern thinker can only define himself as pure transience, playing systematically the provisional against the subsistent, finding to exist in nothing more than the pluritus of innovation, redefined and amplified as progress, estimating that he must repeal the past from where he comes. He will only find how to define himself like a creator, denying himself as a creature, not a no begun beginner, a self-referenced monad whirling on the surface of an horizontality without horizon, only able to grasp himself as an ego unconditioned, transcendental subject who, copying Gorgias, declared the things inexistent, the thing in itself unknowable, and who, copying the man measure of Protagoras, replaced the very thing by the nature of the glance it drops on what the eye is showing to him. For the modern subject, the spontaneous natural data are replaced by his artificial constructions. Since the century of enlightenment, the modern mind has been refusing to be enlightened. It wants to be enlightened. The reasonings supposed to interpret those light shows set themselves only on the performative mode, magic wand from spell to blackmail, which with which the language simulates, with the help of social pressure, the insertion of the causal gear among the signs in order to impact the weakened consciousnesses. The modern subject does not care to say he wants to make people believe he sells peaches. He does not care about reality. He needs suggestibility. It follows that the modern Caliban can be located from long range by his stubbornness to give lessons, since nothing makes sense except himself. Everybody has to believe and imitate him in order to avoid to be exposed as a retrograde loser. If he were animal, the modern subject would be a navalist without navel. If he were a vegetal, that would be a fruit without trace of stem. Nec illum, abbreviation nihil. As he is human, he is a nihilist, excitator and resoundator of the frequency zero. Condemned to overbidding, the modern drought cannot, of course, stay modern. He will grow into postmodern, then postmodern, putting himself in abyss, throwing the opaque radiance of its nihilism on the world in a bewildered toboggan run, a centrifuge nosotropism that will destinate any cultural appliance to its indefinite destruction. End of philosophy, end of art, end of history, and of everything. Except the fetishist litany of progress, becoming hereby an oxymoron, and of course, and of the transcendental subject, but a kind of no resolutive and playful suicide, leading to thousands of plateaus where the bamboo develops thousands of verbose rhizomes, and of all but gossip, a liquorous, compulsive gossip, a minimalist chanting wheel music, never ending to listen itself ending. This toboggan brown to the end, pure expressions of Thanatos pulsion as the sublime points, the millenarist doctrines, and other God's twilight gives to the nothingness gurus a vertiginous suggesting power exploitable by the sophists, renamed communicators, that will survive to the programmed slaughter of the philosophers working on the substitution of propaganda to philosophy. That is what I noticed coming back to high school as a teacher. After my master graduation, the necessity of brain winner drove me to integrate this national education from 1978 to 2000. I reckon I haven't done my job with pleasure, breathing a still some atmosphere in a public service, assuming its quality of public service. I initiated a notable proportion of pupils wishing to learn, even a certain number of exceptional elements, some of them having jumped in superior studies of philosophy. Moreover, I had a correct relationships with most of my colleagues and administrative bureaucrats. From 2000 to 2014, that is another story. I feel having discovered the adventure of a worker who began to work in a factory led by a leader and who finished his career in a factory managed by a trustee of bankruptcy. In 36 years, the profession of teacher passed from a modern device keeping still some consistent to a postmodern device dizzyingly inconsistent. Device, moreover, anxious to hide its inconsistence behind an appearance of consistent. Wigs, dentures, all the possible processes pathetically implemented on an organism unable to develop from inside any sound function. Instead of stands, signs. Instead of things, words. Instead of content, containers. Instead of actual molecule, exception. Instead of homogeneity, emulsions. Instead of authority, hyperregulations. Lyotard translates perfectly this evolution, writing that modernity is still history and that postmodernity is nothing more than small stories. I lately cared to read Lyotard and other sociologists when I wished to operate a reflexive return on this tiresome loss of substance and sense on this passage from narrative to nano-narrative, in of which I was able to seize only surface phenomena. Sociology allowed me to enlarge my bow of visibility and to put some words of explanation on those impressions. First of all, the lecture of Debord and Baudrillard helped me to connect the structure of the Platonic cave to the structure of the Société du Spectacle. This sick show, whose simulators, since years, displeased to me as much as they pleased to the public. Then, the lecture of Girard helped me to attribute this stubborn Gregorism that never ceased to irritate me since my teen years to the mimetic parameter of the desire. I knew already that every level of the soul felt a specific desire, but I ignored that if the desire produced by the superior level was aiming to knowledge and wisdom, the desire, the desire produced by the opposite level unvetted only incidentally the objects of despotism, greed, miserliness, gluttony, lust. Girard told me that the object of the lower desire has in itself no more attractivity than the ball in any ball game. If the players are eager to catch it, it is not really for its substance, but mainly to dominate the opponent. It is for imitating the intimidation parades of the competitors that the player run after any object, however ridiculous. Any opportunist who knows that can organize the praise of a potential practice towards an object of consistency and value near to zero. That is how, with a fake duel, any manipulator can replace the poor interest calculation well understood by the miserable reflex of the God's show. A few accomplices will be enough to simulate the pursuit of the transitional object, or even a parrot to repeat sufficiently the same message in order to fetishize the object, to make it irresistible, and to generate a flow that will not stop to increase in power until overexcitement. This fact is experimented by Bernays in his book Propaganda. This fact is observable in all the fashions, advertising hypes, auctions, not to mention the Black Fridays and all the lynching parties. As soon as the quantic electrons feel collective attractiveness, they switch their quantum to determinism, that the neurobusiness experts can canalize towards a cashable no object, an overdetermined junk, the program obsolescence gadget behind which is ready to take over the following innovative gadget on the treadmill of an unlimited show. Afterwards, the lecture of Lash and Michéa helped me to identify the cause of the social and individual gadgetization, the substitution of the economic power to the political power. I grew up in a post-war France, a country still able to take advantage of its national independence and to strive to operate by himself its political choices. It was not a golden age, far from it, but the state assumed its sovereign function. It disposed of a strike force that imposed some respect. It minted its own money. It organized its administration without externalizing its gestion to any private foreign consulting firm. It provided work to any applicant. The public services warranted to any citizen quite correct benefits. The user would be protected by army, police, looked after by hospital, supplied in energy by reliable suppliers, transported by regular transport. His mail was dispatched, his communications passed, and who will deny that the school obtained notably superior results compared with today, as much in the private Catholic sector as in the public sector, as long as the church and the state, despite their imperfections, are non-profit organized, in principle finalized to the common good, and whose duty is to administrate the user, not to make customers profitable. It's a different when it comes to the economy. Montville, Smith, Ricardo, Bentham, Hayek inform us sufficiently on this matter, so that if the economy finalized on the proper good subverted the politic, the state would become a profit organized. As a matter of fact, that is what it really became from some geopolitical reasons when the Berlin Wall fell, when the bipolar nuclearized world left room to a globalized village whose maintenance income de facto to what Huntington called the global hyperclass. The fabulous ideologue Fukuyama even promised the end of the wars in his bestseller, The End of History, as if globalism, like in some musical comedy, was the deus ex machina who provided the denouement of the plot and the final happy end. Now, what is the real effect of global social engineering? If the economy governs, as long as the most economic form of governance is governed by chaos, it will be enough to open the eyes to notice that perpetual peace is not coming to the appointment. The people has been disposing of a quarter of a century to learn what is the ethics of the economic predators club dominating the Darwinist food chain. The general outlines had been defined at the occasion of varied congresses, like Davos encounters inspired by the San Francisco Hotel Fairmont one in the 1995, where some very influential congressmen were advised of a statistic forecasting that in the 21st century, 20% of the global active population would be enough to maintain the economic activity from what the problem would consist to keep the governability of the supernumerary 80%. The Tyrannosaurus Zbigniew Brzezinski, former American Secretary of State, author of the bestseller The Grand Chessboard, proposed a solution: TTtainment, abbreviation of TT entertainment, concept he cared to define, cocktail composed of stupefying entertainment and sufficient nutrition, allowing to keep in good mood the frustrated population of the planet. To the 20%, the warm, fleshy breast, the juicy nipple full of gorgeous milk. To the 80%, the rubber titty full of nothing. Thrown to the walls of mimetic desires with written music invitating to some hand clapping, food gadget driving a bees, under cultural gadget driving moron. Many have become both, hopping, wedding, clapping hands, feeling good mood. If we applicate this principle to the school, knowing that beyond the fateful 20%, the disclosure of the real knowledge, formative, mentally rewarding, becomes counterproductive, causes an additional cost, and gives the taste of thing to some social classes expected to have a taste of morons. It is necessary to confine this one in a waterproof niche, as a result of which the gestion of educational institutions must program for the 20% of girls schedules to count for something, a very selective center of excellence, where the classic pedagogic plan would be kept. And for the 80% of oysters, schedules to count for nothing, a second-rate cluster of junk food program, flashy appearance, miserable content. Theory? No. Practice. Jesus says, we recognize the tree by its fruit. Even the technocrats of the Cooperation and Economic Development Organization, who set the PISA ranking, are forced to recognize that from 2000 to 2024, France has passed for lecture from the 15th to the 28th mondial rank, for mathematics from 11th to 23, for sciences from 13th to 26th. Enough to shut the beak of all the gollywooks whistling the progress song. Let me precise that this junk food has no need to be cooked by who knows what club of plotters. It simply results of the very structure of the Darwin food chain, which replaces ethics by profitability, which forcibly integrates culture into market. Leo Creux told me that, advised by some consultants connected to some lobbies, the French ministry delegated a full authority in matter of education to a cult of Orwellian intellectual terrorists, self-named Science of Education. whose method was simply a drastic reduction of the content and requirements, with the hypocrite hope that the pupil will construct his knowledge by himself, and with the hypocrite certainty that he was born good and all knowing, to forge presentable result of the coffee mill turning without coffee, the rating had been folded to the adjustment variables of the grading curve, leading to a cascading devaluation of diplomas, including those of the teachers who were also forced to work badly. I shall say no more about these outrageous postmodern deconstructions of the knowledges, about this laboratory of governance by chaos. I will add only a few words upon discipline. The bureaucrats, now barricaded in their offices, as lenient with the pupils as they become rigid with the teachers, delegated to those the whole responsibility of order keeping. The surveyors stopped monitoring. Their chiefs, educational counselors, transformed their offices into psychological support units. Result: incivilities, delinquency, deterioration of premises, material theft, racket, drug, drug trafficking, prostitution, and alas, murders. Delivered to the hands of the globalist hyperclass, the institutions supposed to convey culture had become a fake factory made of cardboard that produces more and more illiteracy, ignorance, and inequality. Let us not be mistaken. I do not establish that the practice of business is fundamentally harmful. What I am rejecting is the extension of profiteering to all institutions. As Benoit XVI said, there are some non-negotiable points: exterior and interior security, health, instruction, not to mention ethics, are not marketable and must not come under the control of merchants. Learning lessons from this masquerade, I will briefly define the reason of being and the purpose of this YouTube channel. Since the age of 14, I learned from Plato to evaluate the ontologic consistence of objects, of men, and most of all, of statements that were proposed or imposed to my consciousness. I believe that the postmodernity ideologues use as as pretext the simulacre of progress to impose an ideology that masks exactly the contrary: the programmed mental regression of 80% of the global population. I postulate that there must be among these so-saying oysters a certain proportion of free spirits to which the distorted perspectives of the educative system has not provided the opportunity of training their critical thinking, of ensuring their judgment, or of structuring their questioning, of flourishing their culture. It is to these free spirits that I dedicate my teaching on this channel. I still have to explain the title of my channel and to justify its choice. I titled this channel Plato, Plato along the thread by thread of the text. Plato, because I will only try to analyze and interpret text attributed to Plato. Text, because this word comes from the Latin textus, tissue, diverting from the verb exile, to weave, as well as the weaver can weave various kinds of threads, the writer can weave different signs related to various things. It is the case in the Vedas and Upanishads, which show the Sanskrit word sutra, woven thread, to designate a simple aphorism or a collection of aphorisms. The texture of a material depends on the nature and on the quality of the threads and on the tightening of those on the loom. Socrates use, uses this metaphor, page 268 of Phaedrus, concerning rhetoric talks. The material is not much tight. Diastekos oton to etrium. By extension, the texture of a solid indicates the arrangement of its constitutive matter and void, compactness and dissolution. This also applies to the texture of the text. It is the texture evaluation that will allow to distinguish a consistent or inconsistent statement. This also applies to any reality. From the ontologic point of view, the being is subjected to compressive of or sublimating forces. We can say that there is something tasteful and something blandly being, something centripeting and something centrifuging being. I gave above as example of inconsistent propaganda in management and pedagogy. What about thread by thread? While criticizing the loosening of the rhetoric logos, is Socrates suggesting that the philosophic logos has to be maximally tightened. That could be the case for Wittgenstein. This is not the impression given by Platonician prose, which is at the same time philosophic and literary. In my opinion, the Plato's text is woven using the thread by thread technique. This method of weaving alternate heterogeneous fibers, either by color with a velvety effect or by texture to obtain material specifically textured, that is to say, maintaining such a proportion of elasticity and rigidity. The thread by thread tightening must be calculated so as to harmonize colors and texture in their mixes, similarities and difference, even sometimes in their contrasts, and also that the eye reconcile them without confusing them. This seems to me to be the quality of all good code, which has the property of immersing the reader in an atmosphere that results of the weaving of signs and thoughts, words and things, images and ideas, and in which the doctrine is bought in order to be enlightened, intuited, and memorized. It will only mention I will only mention here two Platonic examples. The dialogue form that seems emblematic to me, the argumentative threads of various characters combine or oppose each other till the resolution of contradictions or aporia. We can also mention the alternation of reasoning developing themselves till the limit of this piercing thinking and myth that cross this limit to soar toward the horizons of intuition. The obtained result can be compared to different glances from different suitors on the Penelope tapestry. Almost all are impressed by the beauty of the whole. Almost all see the same thing, the same signs, but each one can draw from it a different interpretation according to the rectitude of his desire, the sharpness of his judgment, and the depth of his knowledge. Unlike most of the philosophers, but following the example of Pythagoras, Plato did not entrust writing with a philosophical system provided with an organic structure. This esoteric teaching remained locked away between academy's walls. For posterity, Plato left a material of excellent quality, but composite, so that each reader will be able to relate each thread to the whole and to draw from it the peculiar synthesis that his level allows him to draw. I have said enough for today. Next time, I will begin to study the dialogues of Plato. For the first one, I have chosen Timaeus.